Hey everybody, this is Damien from Guitar Journey here, and as always, I hope your personal guitar journey is going great. I want to talk to you today about a different category of scales. Now these scales are sometimes called jazz scales, they're sometimes called synthetic scales. I like to call them altered scales. And off to the side, I know that some people might say, well, there's actually only one altered scale, it's the Super Locrian, whatever. The terminology is not really that important, okay? There are a couple of reasons that I'm making this video today. One, the first reason is that a subscriber to the Guitar Journey YouTube channel wrote a comment that they'd never really been able to use altered scales and that they'd really like to hear them in their proper context, okay? And I want y'all to know that I really do read and respond to all the comments, and I love when somebody suggests a topic for a video. So on that note, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please either send me a direct message or leave a comment, okay? I'd really appreciate if you did that. We all grow that way, okay? There is another reason that I'm making this video, and I want to be very clear about this. I am a rock guitarist. I do play some jazz, and I enjoy it very much, but I really don't identify as a jazz guitarist, okay? I'm a rock guitarist with sort of a progressive and sometimes a blues foundation. I do a lot of different stuff, but I definitely am not really a jazz guitarist. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because I really feel like very often we rock, pop, blues, country, whatever guitarists kind of sell ourselves short when it comes to the types of chords and scales that we use in our everyday playing. I can honestly tell you that as a rock guitarist, I use extended chords like 7ths, 9ths, 13ths, all that kind of thing all the time in my playing and in my writing. And moreover, I use so-called jazz scales, altered scales, synthetic scales, whatever you want to call them, all the time in my soloing. Actually, that's one of the reasons I don't really like calling these kinds of scales jazz scales. I don't think they are just for jazz, okay? That being said, altered scales can be quite challenging to use. And this is because we can't just plant our feet in a given key and a given altered scale and expect it to work throughout the chord sequence, okay? You know what we're used to as rock guitarists, right? We figure out the key that a song is in, and then we just grab a scale, whether it's a pentatonic scale or a diatonic scale, and we just go from there. In rock music, we don't really change keys very often with a solo. Sometimes we do, but not all that often. And so again, you can just grab a scale, whether it's pentatonic, diatonic, whatever, and that'll carry you through the entire song. But it's not the same way with altered scales. Altered scales literally are chord specific. You might have a really, straightforward 4-chord progression, and you might be using a different scale for each chord, okay? This is sometimes referred to as chord-scale compatibility. The idea that the scale you're using for your improvisation is sort of specifically compatible with each chord in the underlying harmony, the underlying chord sequence. And of course, this means that we need to be able to change scales on the fly as the chords flow past us, and yeah, that can be pretty challenging. But it really does have to be that way because altered scales are sort of unique in that they don't overlap. They don't have the same notes as any specific diatonic major scale. Very quick aside, without meaning to get into a huge discussion of modes, which to me are a different animal, the thing about the traditionally recognized modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, whatever, they actually have the same notes as a given diatonic major scale. They overlap, but altered scales do not. And again, that's why I tend to like to call them altered scales. It sort of underscores the idea that they don't have the same notes as any given diatonic major scale. They don't overlap. We've altered them in some fashion, okay? But the end result is that if you're playing a chord sequence that really is specifically diatonic to a given key, something simple, A minor, F, C, G, that's totally 100% A minor. An altered scale really isn't going to work all that well in that situation. So instead, You can sort of think of altered scales, and believe me, this is a really oversimplification, but you could sort of think of, at least by way of an introduction to altered scales, you can sort of think of them as what to use when you see a chord that actually doesn't fit in with the key that the overall song might be in. It is not diatonic, as we say, to the overall key of the song. And so that being the case, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give a few examples of some altered scales that I use pretty frequently in my own playing. And I'm going to be demonstrating them over a backing track. And you're going to get to hear that these altered scales really do sound pretty cool in a pop or a rock setting. Again, they're not just for jazz. I emphasize that, okay? So up on the screen, you can see a chord chart. It's about 24 measures or so. And I'm going to be playing over those chords and choosing different scales to accommodate those chords, okay? As I try to use this concept of chord scale compatibility, I'm going to be thinking about the notes that make up each individual chord in the sequence, and I'm going to ask myself what scale or scales will really work well over that specific chord. And I want to point out, very often we'll have a number of choices, okay? It's not just one specific scale is going to work over one chord or one type of chord or whatever. We'll have several choices, okay? The scales that I'm going to be playing over the backing track with are as follows. The overall sequence, you can probably guess, it's in D major, B minor. Of course, those are relative keys. D major and B minor, it kind of floats back and forth between D major and B minor. So you're going to hear me play a D major diatonic scale. You're going to hear me play a B minor pentatonic blues scale. Okay? Again, I'm a rock player, and those scales are extremely effective. Okay? But you're also going to hear me play a scale called G melodic minor. You'll hear me play a scale called G Lydian dominant. You'll hear me play a scale called B harmonic minor. You'll hear a whole tone scale based on F sharp, and you'll also hear a scale called F sharp half whole diminished. That's a lot, but it sounds really nice, I think. Just as an aside, by the way, I'm going to be the first to admit I'm kind of overdoing it in this example. I don't necessarily know if I would play all those different scales in the course of only 24 measures, okay? But for the sake of displaying what these altered scales can sound like, I'm probably using them maybe a little bit more even than I might normally do. And another super quick aside, okay? Historically speaking, a scale like melodic minor or harmonic minor probably wouldn't really be considered an altered scale at all. But in the modern era, and for the purposes of this video, what we're doing here today, I'm kind of grouping them in with other altered scales, okay? So now that that's out of the way, here's a quick explanation of those different scales so you can see that the altered scales really are specific to certain chords. Now you're going to be hearing a D major 7 chord, and at other times you're going to be hearing a B minor 7 chord. Those chords are totally diatonic to D major and B minor. So I don't really need to do an altered scale over those chords. I'm going to rely on my trusty D major diatonic scale, my trusty B minor pentatonic blues scale, and those are going to work. Very simple, but very effective. But in the third measure, you're going to see a G minor major 7 chord. Now normally in the key of D major or B minor, the chord built off G is actually going to be major. It's going to be a major 7 chord. So here we're getting a G minor chord, albeit with a major 7. That is a bit of a twist, okay? Again, quick bit of theory that you don't need to worry about. It's sometimes referred to as a modal interchange chord, or sometimes people in the modern era refer to it as a borrowed chord. They use the word borrowed to indicate that although we're in D major, the parallel, not relative, the parallel minor key of D major is D minor, same letter name, D minor. And in the key of D minor, there really is a G minor chord. So it's a little bit like a borrowed chord, okay? We're getting a G minor chord instead of the G major chord that we normally see in D major. We're borrowing it from D minor, okay? I could do a number of things here, but I'm going to play G melodic minor, because when I look at my G minor or my G minor major 7 chord, it is G, B flat, D, F sharp. Well, my G melodic minor has G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F sharp. Fits very, very well. And I haven't, by the way, you'll notice a lot of those notes are in common with my home bass key of D major. And that's something you'll find yourself doing, okay? Accommodating the given chord, but not straying too far from your home bass key. Okay, moving right along. Later in the sequence, you're going to see a G dominant 7 chord, and I'm going to play a scale called G Lydian dominant over that G7 chord. The Lydian dominant scale is kind of like a major scale, but it has both a raised 4th scale degree, kind of like the Lydian mode, but also a flatted 7th scale degree, kind of like the Mixolydian mode. So my G Lydian dominant scale is going to consist of G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, and F natural. And as you see, that fits beautifully with my G7 chord because my G7 chord is G, B, D, and F natural. We've accommodated the chord and not strayed too far from our home bass key. Okay? Very quick aside, feel free to ignore this. If we think of ourselves as being in B minor, that G7 chord, it can almost be thought of as a tritone substitution. It would be 5 of 5. That is to say, it would be the 5 chord, okay, of the F sharp, which would be the 5 chord of of B minor. The normal 5 of 5 would be C sharp 7. Tritone sub of that is G7. Anyways, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But Lydian dominant tends to be a nice scale to use over a tritone sub, okay? Moving on, we see an F sharp 7 chord, okay? I'm going to play B harmonic minor. F sharp 7, as I just said, is the 5 chord of B minor. What does F sharp 7 have for notes? F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and E natural. What does B harmonic minor have? B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G natural, and A sharp. Fits beautifully, okay? And by the way, this playing the harmonic minor over the 5 chord of a minor key is pretty frequently done. That's not even really very unusual, okay? Later on, you're going to hear me play a whole tone scale, okay? And I'm playing that whole tone scale over the F sharp augmented chord, the F sharp 7 augmented. An augmented chord has a 5th tone that is raised a half step. Normally F sharp 7, as I said, would have F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and E natural. But now it's going to have F sharp, A sharp, C double sharp. A lot of people would call that D, but it's more proper to call it C double sharp. And again, the E note. F sharp, A sharp, C double sharp, aka D, and E. And how does that fit with my F sharp whole tone scale? A whole tone scale is a symmetrical scale where every note is 2 frets apart from every other note, okay? So my F sharp whole tone scale is going to consist of F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C, and D, okay? And E as well. F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, C, D, E, okay? So once again, they fit beautifully with each other. And the final altered scale I'm going to use, I admit it's kind of a weird one. I'm playing it over the F sharp 7 sharp 9 chord, okay? And again, I can do a lot of different things here, but I'm choosing to use a scale called F sharp half whole diminished in that particular measure. When we break down that F sharp 7 sharp 9, we have an F sharp, an A sharp, and a C sharp. We also have an E note. But that sharp 9, we would properly call G double sharp. G double sharp. If you want to call it A, that's really okay. But properly it would be called G double sharp. So again, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E, and G double sharp. Well, what's our F sharp half whole diminished scale? You can probably figure it out just from the name of the scale. It's another symmetrical scale that starts with a half step from the root and then a whole step, then a half step, then a whole step. So building it from F sharp, we're going to go to F sharp to G, A sharp, C, C sharp, okay, D sharp, E, and of course back to the F sharp. So our half whole diminished scale once again does its job of incorporating the notes of the chord that's being played in an interesting way without straying too far from the home bass key, okay? Whew. So that's the theory, okay? I know that's a lot to take in. Take your time with this. And as always, you really want to take things just step by step, gradually begin incorporating these different scales into your playing. You really don't need to jump in with both feet trying to learn every conceivable altered scale, and believe me, there's a bunch. Start with one or at the most two that you hear today. I think harmonic minor is a great one to start with. But that being said, take this step by step because it can be overwhelming. I know it can be. So now you're going to get to hear me navigate these different chords and different scales on the fly, okay? Wish me luck. This is going to be tricky, but I'm going to do my best. All right, there you go. I hope this brief introduction wasn't too scary, okay? Like I said, I wanted to do this video to sort of invite everyone to start to add more variety, more spice to your improvisations. And also, because not only improvisations, but because altered scales sort of depend on chord sequences that aren't fixed rigidly in a given key, I want to invite you to try to come up with some more interesting chord sequences that deviate from being strictly diatonic, that deviate from just being in one key all the time, okay? This could be a great adventure for all of us. So that's all I have for you today, okay? I really hope you found this video useful, and as always, please subscribe to the channel, okay? Really appreciate it. We have a lot of great content here, and there's tons more content coming. I'm releasing a new video every week, okay? And again, as I said earlier, if you have a suggestion for a video, please let me know. And whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment as well. I always say that even if we don't agree, we can all learn from each other, and that will enrich all of our guitar journeys, okay? Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.